Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Managing FileVault. Thanks for joining us. As everyone is still getting signed in, we'll just go over a few housekeeping items. Please think of all questions throughout the webinar and direct them to the Q&A section. We'll be answering them throughout and at the end of the webinar. This webinar will be recorded, and we will share the recording with you shortly after the webinar is finished. If we don't get to all of your questions, we'll follow up with you afterward. Reaching out to info@jamf.com will also get you in contact with someone at Jamf quickly. Welcome to Managing FileVault with Jamf. I'm Mark Buffington, a consulting engineer here at Jamf that specializes in Apple-specific workflows and technologies. Our agenda today, we'll have a little talk about tokens. We'll take a look at different FileVault workflows and approaches to managing inventory and reporting and how that can function both for targeting devices you wish to enable encryption on, as well as for reporting from a compliance perspective. And lastly, we'll look at some ongoing FileVault management workflows and how those can be enabled and used as well. First, a JAMF overview. JAMF helps organizations succeed with Apple. JAMF's Apple Enterprise Management Solutions are here to help organizations connect, manage, and protect Apple devices. In today's webinar, we'll be diving into some of the challenges the enterprise faces when it comes to securing data at rest when managing Mac and Apple's native encryption technology of FileVault. We'll discuss solutions primarily with Jamf Pro examples. However, the same management principles apply to our other management platforms such as Jamf School and Jamf Now. Jamf helps more than 57,000 organizations manage 25 million plus Apple devices and counting. When the enterprise needs the world leader in Apple management, they turn to Jamf. The world's largest banks, tech companies, most valuable brands, and largest companies choose Jamf for Apple management. Jamf has a history of same-day support, and we are in lockstep with Apple's release cadence. We don't want a new operating system version to slow down your Apple device deployments due to any outdated or legacy tool sets, and our history and track record shows a successful record of achieving those goals. Okay. Managing FileVault. What's significant about FileVault so much that it warrants its own webinar? Isn't it like other settings management? Simply check a box, turn it on, and force this rule? In many ways and many instances, yes, it is that easy. However, different workflows and different deployment methods of macOS computers can result in different outcomes. It doesn't need to be a complex thing, but in a deployment workflow where different apps, restrictions, custom scripts, and even additional user accounts are installed on a machine, it's important to know how that is going to affect the outcome and management of FileVault. So those things are directly related. So first, let's take a look and do some reading. Apple maintains excellent documentation for IT administrators, and they recently updated and consolidated their different deployment references and the MDM reference for IT into the singular Apple Platform Deployment Guide. If you've never seen this before, check it out. If you have seen this before, check it again. Seriously. More info continues to be added to these guides over time, painting a clearer picture of different expectations and different changes that occur through subsequent operating system versions. Specifically related to FileVault, there are a couple pages within this platform guide that are must-reads. This page here, for example, outlines how tokens and cryptographic users work on macOS, including changes in macOS 11 that expanded the use of Bootstrap tokens with MDM. Ultimately, these recent changes make things more straightforward for how a first user account receives that coveted first cryptographic token that's required for FileVault. And while reading is best, a brief summary can be useful for us so we're all on the same page. First up is secure token. In short, it's a cryptographic key that's assigned during the account creation, and it's wrapped by that user's password. So that key is linked to that user, and if that user has a token, they can give a token to another user as well. And that attribute, that cryptographic piece, exists regardless of if FileVault is being managed or not. So it's important to know in your deployment workflow, even if you've never managed FileVault before and you're looking at doing it now, it's important to know which users have tokens. And as mentioned before, this is required for FileVault management. And now we'll take a look at really the high-level summary of how Apple sums it up in the guide. I hope this is helpful. In macOS, on APFS volumes, encryption keys are generated either during user creation, setting the first user's password, or during the first login by a user of the Mac. So several different ways. In macOS 11 or later, setting the initial password for the very first user on the Mac results in that user being granted a secure token. In some workflows, that may not be the desired behavior, as previously, granting the first secure token would have required the user account to log in. And this language is very deliberate, especially if a deployment workflow programmatically adds additional local user accounts, when the policy that does so may run before the first intended primary user account is created during setup. The next type of token we'll take a look at is a Bootstrap token. This was introduced in macOS 10.15, where when a secure token user is created or signs in, an additional token gets escrowed to MDM. So that additional key gets sent to MDM, and macOS can request that when it sees fit. This can be if a user account signs in that doesn't have a secure token, the login window will grant them one as they sign in. This can also be used for different management workflows with Apple Silicon computers with the M1 chip. It's important to note a Bootstrap token does not need to be actively managed by IT administrators. macOS will attempt to make it whenever it can and get that sent to MDM like JAMF Pro. And it will also request it when it sees fit. No action is required from IT for that as well. And this is supported in all of our MDM products for device management, JAMF Pro, School, and Now. Scrolling down a little bit further, we have volume ownership. And this topic is specific to computers with Apple Silicon. And while it's not directly related to FileVault and what we're talking about today, the workflows that lead to successful FileVault deployments also apply to deploying computers with Apple Silicon and ensuring that the users on the computer have this volume ownership attribute for different functions as well. In short, it's another cryptographic user attribute, allowing users to access the owner identity key that's stored in the secure enclave. And it's required for functions like software updates, managing legacy kernel extensions as well. The Bootstrap token also has volume owner privileges, meaning that software updates, when initiated by an MDM server, can provide that authorization programmatically as well. And as mentioned, if you've got a workflow that users receive a secure token, they should also be an owner. Okay, we've identified how macOS handles cryptographic keys for user accounts, but how does that apply to your current or ideal deployment workflow? Again, the deployment guide has great example scenarios and is worth revisiting. First is the concept of when a user sets up a Mac on their own. And this can lead to the most straightforward path. I like to kind of think of this as a happy path, this basic workflow, and it really is embraced if you are using a true zero-touch deployment. In this scenario, the user sets up that new computer. They get that first secure token. The Bootstrap token is escrowed to MDM. So if you have a managed administrator that needs to sign in later, they can retrieve and get a token from MDM that way. And once that's set, a management action, as we'll look at those choices ahead, that action can then enable FileVault for that user, and a personal recovery key is then escrowed. So that can be used in the future when access to the disk is required. Moving to the next broad deployment type is when a Mac is provisioned by an organization. And here there's guidance to how tokens work when an organization sets things up, as that IT account is going to be the first one to get the token instead of the day-to-day user. And this is really that area where you want to exercise some caution with these workflows, or at least know how your deployment is affected, checking that token status along the way. So one scenario is if an IT admin sets up a computer, they're going to get that first token. But the good news is in macOS 11 or later, the Bootstrap token also gets escrowed. So generally easy to resolve. And there's a couple scenarios, however, where if a JAMF policy runs before a user is created, with a couple scenarios, that could cause an unintended user to get the first token. That's a local account created by a policy. Setting that password can get a token. And scripts which pass a username and password, which is generally not a good security practice, that can also give that scripted user the first secure token. And note that if you do an additional user in a JAMF Pro pre-stage or the JAMF management account, have those created, that does not apply to those bottom two items, and it will not get the first secure token. Okay, that's a lot of talk about tokens. Really, when it comes to how you're looking at this, if your deployment workflow, if it could be affected, who gets the token when you're managing FileVault, it's really best to make and assess a plan of what your goals and outcomes are to set this up right. And that's going to start simply with a plan. Define what success means. What does that look like? What method do you want to use to enable? How do you plan on targeting and reporting? And how do you plan on ongoing managing those recovery keys? One could reasonably argue that any FileVault deployment is going to have these items here as some of their core goals. Enable FileVault as soon as you can to ensure that data is safe at rest before you give access to additional materials. Escrow that personal recovery key, rotate it when you use it, and ongoing, you may also have something set to reissue and escrow a new personal recovery key or PRK if it's not on file. You'll notice among those considerations, I'm leaving out institutional recovery keys, and that's intentional. An institutional key has limited utility for unlocking and decrypting Intel Macs, but Apple Silicon Macs no longer have target disk mode. So in order to use an institutional recovery key, you would first need to authenticate with a personal recovery key or a known FileVault user before having access to disk utility. With all that in mind, within the Apple deployment guide and elsewhere, Apple does recommend personal recovery keys instead of institutional. So just make note of that. Another question that we often hear is, do I enable an IT administrator for FileVault? And that has a number of things to consider. First, why not use the personal recovery key? This goal of adding an IT admin, it adds complexity to your workflows for sure. And it's really not a secure practice. And that's for a couple reasons. Firstly, you don't want to have a known password that effectively is a key to your entire fleet's computers. That's not very secure. And then also, if you are adding this complexity, you're likely going to be scripting something that passes through a known username and password to enable a management account for FileVault, which is also not a secure practice. There are, just for awareness, additional options though in macOS Monterey and Apple Silicon specifically, where a personal recovery key can be used to boot the computer to the login window. And from that point on, you could sign in with an IT administrator, whether they have a secure token or not. So this is helpful if you've got a help desk, someone shuts down their computer before they asked for help with something, you might be able to log into the system and stay separate from that user account on the computer. Okay, enabling FileVault. This should really be the easy part, assuming everything else was set up correctly before. And those enablement methods, there's three main methods. You can pick one, and in some instances, you might even use more than one, but it's worth noting that any given computer should be targeted with just one method. We'll take a look at configuration profiles, a policy, which is specific to JAMF Pro, as well as JAMF Connect login and how those three different paths can be used to enable FileVault. Firstly is a configuration profile. And this is something where the benefits are that, for one, it's similar technology in all MDMs. It's straightforward to apply and universally target devices that you want to set this for. macOS, of course, can trigger either a login or logout event to prompt the user to enable. And then the personal recovery key gets escrowed on the next inventory update. So it's stored encrypted on the computer, and that next update will get that shipped to MDM for management. What does that look like? Here in the security and privacy payload, going to FileVault, and I'm simply checking the box to enable it. I can choose login or logout as my event. Additional options with the recovery key are available. And importantly, getting that personal recovery key escrowed. Anytime deploying a config profile for FileVault, you only need to deploy the pieces that you need to. So in this case, I've got the enable and the escrow, but in other scenarios, you may look at just escrowing the key. Next up is a JAMF Pro policy, which has its own benefits. The policy really can allow for customizing and curating a user experience. This is because, as you know, policies can have different targeting, trigger events, messaging. Maybe you even add in an automatic log out during the workflow. All of that can be put together if that's something that you desire. Again, macOS can trigger that login or logout event as the trigger that enables FileVault. And in this scenario, the JAMF daemon will escrow the personal recovery key immediately from when the FileVault is enabled without needing an additional inventory report. Adding to this, it is recommended to add one config profile simply just with one key that is a setting that disallows the user from disabling FileVault. And we'll take a look at that ahead here. Firstly, the JAMF Pro policy. You can define your triggers as you wish. Here, I'm setting it to a recurring check-in because I'm targeting machines that are not encrypted. I've got my disk encryption configuration, and I can choose that same idea of login or log out to define who gets it, and optionally add messaging, perhaps informing a user that you're asking them to log out and log back in to complete the setup of their Mac. Adding in the configuration profile, I've got simply one checkbox selected, and that's the user adjustment of FileVault options, preventing FileVault from being disabled. So having that on there will effectively gray out the box and disallow someone from turning it off. So with either policy or profile, what does that end user experience look like? On a Mac where it's set to trigger for login, the user is going to see a window like this as they log in after they put in their password. They can either enable it right now, or if they hit cancel, well, they simply can't log in. So that's going to be something that, compared to a log out, many administrators prefer the login trigger because the user is effectively forced to choose the option that you want. Next up, though, is JAMF Connect Login, which does things a little bit differently. So if this is something that's part of your deployment workflow for provisioning machines, consider this as an alternative way to potentially streamline things a little bit more. The benefits here is that this is part of a first login automated device enrollment flow, and it's assumed that there's no users with secure tokens yet. So use this just for new machines that are deployed. And in that first user authentication, a number of things all happen together. The first user account is created just in time with the appropriate admin or standard privileges you desire, assigning it the first secure token, enabling it for FileVault without the need to go back to the login window, and then also getting that Bootstrap token escrowed to MDM. With the requirements here, again, this user needs to be created during provisioning, JAMF Connect configured to enable it, privacy preference policy control profile needs to be set for Connect, simply a checkbox within JAMF Pro to do that, and then a configuration profile to escrow the personal recovery key and disallow turning FileVault off. For the PPPC profile, that's going to be in the security preferences within JAMF Pro, like our other products of Pro and JAMF Protect. Okay, knowing whether you were successful in enabling FileVault or knowing who to target to make them enabled is critical both for compliance and reporting as well as remediation purposes. So we'll take a look at how inventory works with FileVault. Firstly, looking at an individual computer record can show a wealth of inventory data. This is going to be something that data becomes centralized here. And within this, there's a number of items, and we'll take a look at a few of them. And this data can also be viewed within smart computer groups or searches. Simply checking the encryption state, yes, it's encrypted. Is the recovery key valid? Yes, it's valid. That check occurs every inventory update just to validate. If I'm a user that has privileges to view a recovery key, I see the Show Key button. And I can see that in this case, I enabled it with a policy as there's a disk encryption configuration listed. And importantly, you'll see FileVault 2 enabled users there at the bottom. That means the same thing as secure token enabled users. So this is a great way within the JAMF Pro GUI to see who has a secure token on a given device without having to have fingers on the computer keyboard. Working with that data at scale often means creating a smart group to take action or advanced computer search for reporting. If we look at the different FileVault criteria, we'll see FileVault 2 key validation, which can be useful for some workflows, but the FileVault 2 status, where we can look, is it or is it not encrypted? And what exactly are we looking for? Here we're looking for boot partitions encrypted. Basically, that means that the boot volume, which is what FileVault works on, if that is or is not encrypted, is going to be the right way to view that criteria. Beyond the built-in inventory fields, some IT admins may want to add custom attributes or take a deep dive into deployment workflows of their own to see if a different user got that first token. And there's a number of ways to look at this. A comprehensive method is using the FTE setup binary on macOS, which natively handles encryption. Sudo FTE setup list -extended will list out the unique identifiers for each user, the user type, and the user name that's associated with them in the list of this output. So in this case, I can see that I have an operating system user, a Bootstrap token, and a personal recovery key have all been created as cryptographic keys. The similar way to view is the source of truth of using the disk-util command line. Disk-util APFS list crypto users and the volume, so simply a slash tells it to run on the volume I'm running it on. And I can see the same output here, but it's important to know that I'm just seeing the user identifiers. I'm not seeing the actual username. So sometimes an additional query may need to be done here. It's worth pointing out, though, that the use of the binary called sysadmin_ctl should be avoided for checking secure token status, as the criteria of searching with that is too narrow of just looking at one user, whether they have or do not have, versus looking at the entire APFS volume to see the status of tokens and cryptographic keys. Okay, how is a recovery key used ongoing? Picture someone locked out of their computer and maybe they need to reset their password. Personal recovery key, or PRK, can absolutely help in those scenarios. When used, it should be assumed that a key is no longer secure. It may be written on a piece of paper, sent in a message somewhere, and JAMF Pro can have a policy to easily rotate a key silently after use with no user interaction required to make that happen. However, it does require that the known current recovery key must be present in that device record. So as long as that is there, policy can enable that. And then the trigger, the event, as with any policy, set it your preferred method. Maybe your help desk has a workflow where you hit a button in self-service to rotate it automatically. That's up to you. Looking at how that's set up is pretty straightforward within a JAMF Pro policy in the disk encryption section. And it's simply the action of issuing a new recovery key. Very straightforward, not too much to look at, but when you run this, it's going to cycle out that key, and the JAMF agent is going to escrow the key, the new one, to JAMF Pro. But what about scenarios where you don't have a PRK escrowed within JAMF Pro? Perhaps you've migrated management servers to JAMF. Do you need to unencrypt and re-encrypt to get a new key? No. You can target devices that match certain smart group criteria and target them with a workflow that's going to remediate and issue a new key. So targeting with the smart group of FileVault validation is not valid, and the computer is encrypted with FileVault should give you a good group of targets that you want to put this workflow to. It doesn't require unencrypting, so thank goodness data will always be protected, but you're going to want to get that recovery key back into that management record. This can be set as an ongoing policy using that smart group. So if a device falls into the criteria of not having a validated recovery key, this may be targeted and triggered. And it's really a combination of a script and a configuration profile. The profile would be set to escrow the key, and the script would be set to tell FDE Setup to generate a new key, leveraging that current user's password as a means to generate it. For more information, that is available on JAMF's GitHub page. This link here, jamf.it/reissue key, will get you to that script, allowing you to customize it, put your own branding. Maybe you decide to put it in self-service as a trusted application for users to click on a button to get that process started. And it's also worth noting that if any organization is using institutional recovery keys and not personal recovery keys, this reissue workflow can also be useful when it comes to getting a new personal recovery key escrowed for ongoing management of your fleet. Okay. In summary, again, as discussed earlier, FileVault does not need to be complex. If you deploy additional IT user accounts, though, you should assess your current goals or set the additional user creation policies to run after the primary user is created. So knowing your deployment workflow and the outcomes it gives is really that first step, whether it's something that you need to change, modify. It's going to be easier to do that on the front end of a deployment rather than going back and trying to fix. Your enablement methods can truly be a personal preference. Policy, profile, that's really up to you. Just make sure that it's being set to enable in the way that you'd like and get that key escrowed. Rotate the keys when needed. As with anything of giving limited privileges out as well, you can set within JAMF Pro access and auditing of who can view those recovery keys as well. And really, most things when it comes to FileVault actions should be a set it and forget it type of scenario. In many customers that go through an onboarding process, these workflows and even a remediation workflow if needed, they'll often get set up right away, allowing those devices to check in, and if they need action to take place, inventory-based automation in JAMF Pro can get the job done. What other resources are there? JAMF also has more offerings that can help you be successful, whether that's from services, training, or our training catalog, and of course, our support. So many different options to look into if you're looking for a hand with FileVault. And we would be nothing without our customers, and that is proven with the JAMF Nation community. The online forum is home to over 100,000 Apple IT focused individuals that learn from each other, discuss best practices, and have access to a wealth of resources and third-party tools. Create a free account today to join in the discussion if you're not there already. Thanks for listening. We'll email you a recording once this is ready. You can scan the QR code if you need to get in touch with us, or reach out over email to get answers as well. And with that, we'll take some questions.